In this video, you are getting a comprehensive look at the Beast Barbarian, the DPR that you can expect, damage per round, the feats, the races, the strategies, and tactics to use for this Barbarian to make it effective. Many online have said that it can't compete with other Barbarians like the Zealot. I'm going to put that to the test today on Flutes Loot. Before I get started, I want to remind everyone that there is an article that accompanies this video where you can see all my math and everything I go over in this video written out, so it's easy to review, and you can see all the assumptions behind my math, and all the tactics can be reviewed. You can bookmark it for later if you want to play the Beast. The biggest complaint I hear about playing a Barbarian is that it's so linear. You just run in, rage, and attack things, and people love that, but it can get old, especially when you get further into a campaign and you've been doing it for a long time. People want options as a Barbarian. I submit to you that the Beast Barbarian has more options for you to consider, and you can build it a lot of different ways, and even if you don't build it to specialize a certain way, you still have those other options. What are the pros and cons of playing a Beast Barbarian? Here are the pros. You're less dependent on feats to squeeze value out of it. Small races are usually limited as a Barbarian because you want to use heavy weapons. If you don't know, small creatures have disadvantage to attack with heavy weapons, so that's a no-no. The Beast Barbarian overcomes that limitation. And I'm going to show you some of the damage per round calculations for a halfling concept I came up with for the Beast Barbarian and how it competes with other baselines. Your bonus action is opened up in new ways that other Barbarians who are relying on Polearm Master for an extra attack don't usually have. You actually have some good options for your bonus action that are viable or fun. You're able to use a shield as this type of Barbarian without sacrificing too much damage output. It's easier to ride a mount when you're not swinging a big sword and you're not able to hold on to the reins. I know that doesn't come up a lot, but really riding a mount should be a little bit harder than some people give it credit. You're less dependent on magic items because your natural weapons become magical at level 6. Those natural weapons also can't be disarmed because they are part of your physiology, unless something gets severed. The Barbarian class's capstone, +4 to strength and +4 to constitution, might be the most synergistic with this subclass because this subclass has some constitution saving throws that are based on its constitution that could use a boost from that capstone. Call the Hunt is based on your constitution modifier. There's a lot of things based on your constitution modifier in this subclass that most Barbarians don't have, and so you get a little bit more out of that constitution value. The cons: you are very rage dependent. If you're not using the polearm build, which you still can with the Beast Barbarian, you are more dependent on your rage so that you can grow your natural weapons. Your critical hits are weaker because you're usually not using like a D12 weapon, but usually it's optimal for a Barbarian to use like a halberd with polearm master anyway, which is a D10, and so like D6s and D8s really aren't a big deal when you consider brutal critical. Brutal critical rarely gives you more damage output, and so the DPR is pretty negligible. But still, that's a con. Your critical hit dice are a little smaller, which can be less satisfying for some players. In order to really have fun with this subclass, you also need to know a lot of the fringe rules of D&D 5th edition, which are part of the core experience, but it might tax your DM if they don't know a lot of those rules, or you might need to learn a lot. But I'm going to go over those today in my article and in this video so that you can be armed with those rules. And then if you do find magic items, you'll have to choose between if you're going to use your natural weapons or a magical weapon. Or maybe your DM gives you other magic weapons that are tailored to you or that are not like attack based, and so you can still have fun with magic items. But still, if you wanted to wield a certain sword and that would replace your claws, then you might feel a little conflicted. A lot more pros than cons in my opinion, so let's get into it. First, I want to talk about the role-playing potential and the flavor that is so rich with the Beast Barbarian. You could be a basic animalistic barbarian who transforms, or you could even reflavor it, like maybe you're an Aasimar race, and when you rage and gain your bestial features, maybe you become more seraphim, biblical angel, bizarre. There's a lot of fun you could have with it. It doesn't have to be based on beasts necessarily. The options that are suggested in the book are that your parents or one of your parents is a lycanthrope, like a werewolf. You're the descendant of a powerful shapeshifter, like an archdruid. You met some creature like a face spirit that gave you powers, which kind of sounds like animorphs to me. Or an ancient animal spirit is housed within your body, almost like a symbiotic or haunted relationship. Here are some other ideas I came up with. You're an experimental subject people were doing biological tests on and you've escaped, or for some reason your testing facility was destroyed and now you're free. This would do great for some of the Domains of Dread in the Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft book because there's literally like body part switching and experiments going on in some of those domains. Maybe you were cursed by a hag because you failed to hold up a bargain, and so they kind of like turned you into a newt, but you got better and now you have the powers of different animals.
Got better?
Maybe there was a botched polymorph spell or a potion that messed with your physiology and now you're stuck with it, but you've learned to harness it to a degree and you'll learn to harness it more as you level up. Maybe your body was actually augmented like Wolverine with his adamantium skeleton and he pops his claws. Maybe you have some features like that. You could have psionic powers that allows you to absorb some of the evolutionary advantages of creatures around you in like an adaptive sort of mechanism, which kind of reminds me of Mr. Sinister. Yes, I'm an X-Men fan, so that's going to come up a lot, especially Wolverine. Or maybe you have an astral self. Your true self is more of a beast creature, and your astral self manifests when you rage, which is a complete knockoff of the astral self monk, and I'm okay with that. I'm going to quickly go through each subclass feature and what those options mean and some things you might not have considered with them that's going to feed into some of the DPR calculations and builds later on in this video. At level 3, you get Form of the Beast, where you get to, when you start raging, grow claws, a tail, or a like mandible, like a bite, a jaw, teeth, you know, something to do a big bite attack. I recently played a Beast Barbarian where I was a halfling that focused on claws and dual wielding. One of the points about these weapons you can adapt when you rage is that they count as simple melee weapons. They are not light, not weapons that you are holding, they are just part of you, they are options. The claws are interesting because if you make at least one attack with your claws, you get another one for free. No bonus action or other action required. So if you make an attack, you get another one. So at level 3, you can make 2 attacks with this instead of 1. That helps you catch up with custom lineage and variant human barbarians who got Polearm Master at level 1 so they can do 2 attacks. It can also be fun to describe what kind of claws you grow. They could be the same every time, or maybe depending on where you are, you're in an Arctic setting, you have polar bear claws, or if you're in a forest, you have honey badger claws. Tail in the water could be a manta ray or a crocodile feature. Or maybe you want to get a little buggy and scare people and you grow like the mandibles of an ant so that you can bite people. In theory, if you want to change what kind of weapons you've manifested for Form of the Beast mid-battle, and you want to burn another use of your rage, you could start a new rage as a bonus action without ending the previous one, because then you just have 2 overlapping effects, in theory, if your DM's okay with that. I've never had to do that, because usually I know what kind of fight it's going to be for what weapon I choose at the beginning, but it's something to keep in mind. You also want to keep in mind how many times you can rage per day, and how many encounters you're getting in an adventuring day before you get a long rest. If the campaign's norm, or you're just in a situation where the status quo is that you're going to have 4 to 6 combat encounters before you long rest, you really need to choose when you're going to use those rages. And you need to have options for when you're not raging. I was once in an infiltration mission with my Beast Barbarian where we were going around to different parts of a castle and we would take out some guards. And out of those 4 different guard encounters, I don't think I used my rage once because I figured out we could pretty much take them out without me having to rage, and I could save that for when we got into the deeper part of the castle and more dangerous enemies. It's also notable that if you multi-class with something like a druid and you were in wild shape, let's say you're a little furry bunny, you could suddenly grow big teeth as you rage as your barbarian, because in wild shape you get to keep your class features. You could grow a giant tail, big claws, you could become a terrifying little woodland creature, which could be a lot of fun. The bite option can allow you to attack while having other things in your hands and potentially heal yourself if you're down a lot of hit points. It's not a lot of healing, but it could be effectively twice as good of healing if you're raging and you're taking damage that's resisted. So you can lean forward and chomp while in your hand you have a shield. In your other hand, let's say you have like a rapier, and then maybe you want to take like the defensive duelist feat so that you can parry attacks with your rapier and it scales with your proficiency bonus. And that's a good option for when you're not using your tail. And you can be very defensive that way while still attacking with your bite. Also with the bite, I recommend using non-lethal damage on your enemies to knock them out instead of kill them, because then you can coup de grace them and kill them with your bite and get a second chance to heal yourself. So you bite them to take them out, and then they're unconscious, but they're still alive. You can finish them off with a bite, and so you get 2 instances of healing. This is a great way to use your time if you have a surplus of rage duration at the end of a fight, and you've knocked out a bunch of enemies. You just run up to each one and bite them to heal yourself up. Also, if your allies have summoned anything in the fight and they're going to go away soon, and there was a surplus of them at the end of the fight, bite them and gain some life back. Now I want to talk about the claws. They are not weapons that you hold in your hands, so technically they do not qualify for 2-weapon fighting, dual wielding. They're also not light. In order to use 2-weapon fighting, you needed to attack with a light weapon, and then your bonus action attack is with another light weapon. But interestingly, here's what you can do. You can kind of juggle hand axes and use your claws to dual wield with this. On the first round, after you've started raging already, you attack twice with your claws, 1 for your attack action, and then 1 for the free claw attack you get for attacking with your claw. Good job. You could attack with the claw, 2 for 1. And then your other attack, because you have extra attack, you use a hand axe. You draw a hand axe and you attack with it. So you got 3 attacks. In the next round, once again, do the claw, and you attack with the axe, and then that qualifies you to then use your bonus action to attack with another axe. Now, if you take the dual wielder feat and you can draw and stow 2 weapons at once, because there's that silly basic rule where you can only draw 1 weapon per round or stow a weapon per round, you could do the claw attack and then draw your 2 hand axes and attack with those. And then next round, you could attack with the hand axes, put them away and use your claws. And then the next round, pull them out again and rinse and repeat, basically. So you're getting 4 attacks reliably each round. This feels silly to me, but it's completely by rules as written. I would talk to your DM and just say, hey, once I get the dual wielder feat and I can dual wield weapons that are not light, can we just count my claws as dual wielding weapons? If this sounds complicated, leave a comment below and I'll try to explain it a little bit, but basically you can do up to 4 attacks per round very reliably with a Beast Barbarian using claws. Claws are also advantageous in that you can attack with them, but you could also stop to grapple someone with it so that your hand, you didn't need to like drop a weapon or anything, you just chose to grapple them. So it's a good grappling option as well while still attacking. If you're not dual wielding, you can still attack 3 times with 1 claw, while your other clawed hand is gripping someone. So you got them grappled, and then you're still making 3 attacks on them. You couldn't do that with Polearm Master, for example, with the 2-handed halberd. You'd be holding the creature with 1 hand for the grapple, and then you couldn't attack because you need 2 hands for the halberd. So no Great Weapon Master or anything like that. So this is actually a great option if you enjoy grappling, dragging people around, and a little spoiler for later, I'm going to get into some fun you can have with that based on grappling. And then there's the tail. The tail is great because let's say you are doing a Polearm Master Barbarian build, you could just freely grow a tail when you are raging that can be used defensively. If you're already in the range of whoever's coming at you, you don't need to do an opportunity attack as they approach you with Polearm Master. And you roll a d8 and you just add it to your armor class against 1 attack. That can be a great way to increase your survivability. If you don't want to do that, you could still do dual wielding with non-claw weapons like hand axes, or you could have a weapon and a shield while having the tail to help you defend. You have options. It's not as good as casting shield for a +5 for the round, but it is still an option for you that doesn't involve spellcasting while you're raging. Average of 4.5 added to your armor class. If you're going toe-to-toe with a single enemy, especially if they only make 1 attack every round, they might never hit you if you are defending with your tail. I had that happen with my Beast Barbarian at like level 5. I was split from the party and a creature suddenly appeared and I went toe-to-toe with it. Basically took almost no damage between my resistances and my armor class increases from my tail. The other players were very worried about me and then they were like, oh, wow, that was like nothing for you. And I was like, yeah, Beast Barbarian. At level 6, you get Bestial Soul. It makes your developed natural weapons when you rage into magical. They count as magical for the sake of overcoming resistance. You get 3 choices of adaptations that you can change when you short rest. These are not dependent on you raging, you just always get them. The first is a swimming speed with underwater breathing. Pretty classic, but don't forget that having that feature of swimming speed means that your attacks underwater don't have disadvantage. You're not limited to certain weapons that attack normally. So if you are like a Polearm Master build, you'll be just fine underwater with that swim speed. Because you're a barbarian and you can rage and get advantage on athletics, I also like to think that you could do something crazy if your DM allowed some heroic stuff where you like swim up a waterfall. Like the barbarian just seems like the one to do it if anyone's going to do it. The second adaptation is wall crawling and ceiling hanging. This spider climb, which I'm going to call it because it's pretty much like the spell spider climb, is so useful. It's almost like you have a fly speed in the right situations. You can climb above something. Let's say it's a cavern and there's a 30-foot ceiling. You can climb above them, drop down on them, use the falling onto a creature rules, which I'll cover later, and attack them at that point, and they might even be prone. You can stay out of reach and use a reach weapon, which could include your tail or a polearm. Creatures that are down below with only a 5-foot reach on their weapons cannot get you while you have a 10-foot reach. I'd also ask your DM if they'll allow you to say you drop prone against a wall or against a ceiling, because you're not on the ground, and some people only let you do prone if you're like on the ground with gravity pulling you down. But could you flatten yourself up against the wall or against the ceiling and count yourself as prone, so then ranged attacks would have disadvantage to hit you, and then on your turn you just stand up again and attack someone who is close to you as an option? It's a good option to have, so just ask your DM if they'd be okay with that. Then you'll know if you can count on it. It would also be cool if your DM allowed you to climb up gargantuan creatures like Shadow of the Colossus style. There's a Tarrasque running around and you're able to scale its back with your spider climb even though it's a creature. That could be really cool. The third adaptation for Bestial Soul is basically super jump. This is probably the least popular option of the 3, but it has some implications that I don't think most people think about. You roll an athletics check when you jump and you extend your jump maximum distance by whatever you roll. If you're raging, you have advantage on the athletics roll because it's a strength check. You add your strength, you add your proficiency if you are proficient in it. At higher levels, you gain a feature as a barbarian where your athletics rolls will always be at least your strength score. So it becomes very consistent at high levels. It's not consistent at low levels because you might still roll a 1 or a 2 and only increase your jump distance a little bit, but you really only want it to get to 10. If you have a 20 strength, your high jump is 8 feet. If you get a 2 on this super jump, you can then jump up 10 feet, which gives you a falling threshold to take a d6 when you get down. Now, why would you want to do that? Tasha's Cauldron of Everything gives us rules for falling onto creatures that I mentioned a little bit earlier. When you are falling and you take falling damage, if you fall onto another creature, they make a dex save with DC 15. If they fail, you split your fall damage with them. So if you're a barbarian raging, let's say you roll a 3 on a d6. You both take 1 damage, but you resist it, so you end up taking 0, which means you don't fall prone, because if you prevent the damage, you don't fall prone. Otherwise, you both would fall prone. If they pass the saving throw, this doesn't happen, and you just end up prone next to them, but you can stand up. It's a pretty small risk for a barbarian who's raging because the bludgeoning damage is resisted. If you get a higher roll, then it becomes a 2d6 fall because you came from 20 feet. But you also have to consider how much movement you have, because using jump mechanics will use your movement. This is why it could be handy to have a spellcaster in the party who gives you the jump spell and the long strider spell, which aren't concentration, and they can enhance your tactics for this. Usually those spells never get used, but maybe you finally have a reason to. If you have a race that is like powerful build that makes it so your carrying capacity is greater and what you can carry and pull is greater, you could grapple a creature and then take them with you as you jump up into the air, drop them towards the top of the fall so that they fall down, they take fall damage, and then you fall on top of them so that you again do this falling onto a creature rule and they are prone and you can attack them. Your DM might not allow this twofer where you drop them and then you fall onto them, but that's fine. You can still have fun with it even if they don't allow that. If you can fly or you have spider climb, you can drag them up much further along a wall or into the sky before you drop them. You can also use the jump to jump over difficult terrain, which there are rules for that too. So if you can't like climb around something, if there's just like a cliff, you could potentially jump over it. But if you're trying to jump over like a field of brambles or a plant growth spell or something like that, then you could roll, but you just need to be able to jump that distance. So it could be helpful. Things like spike growth, I don't think a lot of people think like, oh, maybe I should jump over that. And sometimes that'll help them take less damage. You just got to know the rules for jumping, which don't get brought up a lot. So like I said, some fringe rules, you got to become a scholar. Also with this jump, you could jump into the air at a flying creature that thinks it's out of your reach, like 20 feet up, and grab it or shove it while you jump up there to knock it prone so it falls down to the ground, or just grapple it so it comes down with you. So it's good to have ranged options as a barbarian, but often barbarians suffer from wanting to be melee and then flying creatures are out of their reach. You could really surprise a creature by jumping up and being like, get down here, and then you bring them right down, and then you give them the game treatment from Super Smash Bros. Who needs a ranged attack when you are the ranged attack? At level 10, you get Infectious Fury. When you hit a creature with your natural weapons, so it again depends on you raging, you can choose to do a layered effect that doesn't augment your attack but is separate, where you force the enemy to make a constitution saving throw, which they are likely to pass, so that's a downside, and it's based on your constitution, the DC, which isn't your primary stat like strength is. So there's a good chance it won't work, to be honest. But if it does work, you just get a flat 2d12 psychic damage, or your other option is to make them attack another ally with their reaction. So you can actually burn their reaction this way. This could be good to use on a spellcaster that is going to counterspell your friendly spellcaster and take away that option because they don't have a reaction anymore because they had to use it to attack somebody. If that doesn't fit the situation, just go for the 2d12 psychic damage. You're basically infecting them with rabies and making them go a little mad from your attack, which is pretty cool. It doesn't work like Divine Smite or Sneak Attack, where it's damage added to your attack, and if you crit, you do it more. So it doesn't help your brutal critical to become a d12. It doesn't allow you to do 4d12 from the 2d12 damage when you crit. It's just 2d12. But again, one of the great things about this barbarian is these features don't clog up your action economy, which leaves you with options of what to do with your action economy and then just augment what you're doing. At level 14, you get Call the Hunt. When you enter your rage, again, does not have to do with your action economy. Just part of entering a rage is you do this battle cry. And up to your constitution modifier, you get to pick a certain amount of creatures that are allied to you, and they choose whether they accept this benefit. For each one that does accept, you gain 5 temporary hit points. And the creature that accepts once per turn can do an extra d6 of damage. In my calculations later, I do consider that a DPR boost, even though it's through your allies, and I made an assumption that the typical party, you probably have 2 other people in your party who are making attacks to take advantage of that d6. If you're doing one of the builds where you're using your tail to defend yourself and you got a shield and everything, that temporary hit points can go a long way. Remember, if you are resisting damage while raging from bludgeoning, slashing, or piercing damage, resistance makes your hit points and temporary hit points effectively doubled. So 5 per person is actually more like 10. So if you have a constitution of, let's say, a +3, so you can pick 3 creatures for this, you gain 15 temporary hit points, but that is almost like getting 30 temporary hit points if you're resisting incoming damage. So that's the overview of these Beast Barbarian features, which you probably heard before, but hopefully I taught you a little something new about 1 or 2 of them. Let's get into some actual character builds we can do with the Beast Barbarian. The first thing I want to look at is the claw option. You focus on your claws and dealing damage with them, and you like to dual wield along with using your claws. I did some DPR calculations to see what it would look like using hand axes and claws when you are just focusing on your strength with your ASIs and you're not investing in feats at all. I'll put that up on the screen here. Basically, you can see the DPR if you have disadvantage, advantage, or just a normal attack. As a barbarian, you should be doing a normal or advantage attack because you're probably going to be using reckless attack, which is not dependent on whether you're raging or not. The baseline I'm using to compare against is the Treant Monk suggested one, where you take a Warlock with Eldritch Blast and Hex, with the Agonizing Blast invocation to boost the damage of that Eldritch Blast. So you can see there in the pinkish purple what that DPR looks like for a Warlock, and then in the percentage numbers, the difference. A green number in this is comparing the DPR of the build I've gone for, and to see if it will outdo or match or be below that Warlock DPR. At lower levels, you're beating it by, depending on the level, like 50%, which is, by Treant Monk standards, a good bit of damage. It's valuable. At higher levels, you're matching it because Eldritch Blast is scaling with cantrip scaling, and then it kind of tapers off as you get to the highest levels. So you can outshine the basic Warlock, Eldritch Blast, Agonizing Blast, Hex combo at low levels, but then you kind of taper off. But again, this is when we're just like doing a very basic build where we're just using claws and no feats and not factoring in like the Infectious Fury damage or any other advantages we might gain. If you look at the brown and red, you can see brown is just a vanilla barbarian using Great Weapon Master and the brown is a vanilla barbarian, no subclass factored in, baseline damage for Great Weapon Master plus Polearm Master. And then the red is like a raid boss Zealot barbarian, which, funny enough, Treant Monk just put out a video about, and his numbers were a little bit higher than mine for that DPR because he factors in opportunity attacks, and I do not do that. I didn't think that it was reliable enough to factor in. My DPR calculations were a bit vindicated because I was able to compare the Warlock and this Zealot Barbarian DPR to what Treant Monk calculated, and most people respect his math. My math is also pretty on point. Just different assumptions behind what we'd allow in the numbers. Looking at those other Barbarians, you will not beat a vanilla Barbarian's Great Weapon Master, Polearm Master, unless for some reason the Barbarian has disadvantage, in which case you do a little bit more damage. Oh, and this is assuming that the Barbarian comparison is getting a Polearm Master feat at level 1, using Variant Human or Custom Lineage for that level 1 feat. And then Claws alone, you can see, doesn't even compete with the Zealot Barbarian using the Great Weapon Master and Polearm Master. It just does less damage. I go into more detail about some of these calculations in my article. I won't bore you with them in the video because I think it's kind of hard to listen to math. It's easier to go read it and kind of process it at your own pace. If you think I need to go into more detail in my article, let me know because I'd be happy to add more details and like the formulas I use in Excel. Gotta love a good spreadsheet. So after I got that calculation, I said, okay, so how can we increase the damage output of our little Barbarian? So then I said, okay, well, what if we take the dual wielder feat at level 1, then the 2-weapon fighting style is gained from taking the fighting initiate feat from Tasha's. Not great feats usually, but I was just curious, what would our DPR look like with those? With disadvantage, we're doubling the Warlock DPR, and then at level 3, 4, when we get our subclass in the claws, we are doubling the Warlock's DPR. And then similar to before, we are getting like a 50% gain on it-ish, and then at level 11, when the cantrip for Eldritch Blast scales to another attack, it starts to catch up with us, but it pretty much can only match us or be below us. So basically, with just these feats and focusing on strength, we're now able to outpace the Warlock significantly at low levels and match or beat it at high levels. So it's not amazing, but it's progress. We're still a good bit below that raid boss Zealot DPR that I'm comparing to. So how else can we improve this? Here's what I came up with for the best output of damage that didn't utilize like an Asimar's transformation or anything like that, because I would have had to factor that into the Zealot too, possibly. And so I just wanted to say, okay, what's something I could passively do? But I learned from my character that I built as a halfling, having halfling lucky to reroll 1s is more helpful than you think. It's actually a DPR boost because it makes you more accurate, and 1s would normally always miss, but now you get to reroll it and you get another chance. I actually ran the numbers with the half-orcs, what's it called, like Savage Attack feature, where it can add an extra die to its critical hits. That does not help your DPR as much as a halfling with lucky. You have the same chance to roll a 1 as you do have a chance to roll a crit. On the crit, you get like, let's say a 4.5 damage boost, but with lucky, you get the DPR of turning a miss into a hit and your overall percentage that you're removing from your DPR based on assumptions of armor class and your chance to hit are improved, so you're actually just keeping more of your damage. So it actually outpaced the half-orc when I ran the DPR numbers. I will note with these DPR numbers that you also will probably have a better armor class, because if you have the dual wielder feat, then you can get a +1 to your armor class. But let's do my ultimate build now, where we do the halfling, so we have lucky involved and it makes their accuracy better, and we add in a few things. One is your leap attacks that I mentioned earlier, where you're jumping into the air with your bestial soul feature. My calculation is based on how likely you are to jump 20 feet in the air so that you can get 2d6 coming down, and then that adds the DPR based on the chance of that and the chance of them failing the saving throw against your landing on them. More on that in the article if you want to see some more details of it. So we're making 4 attacks with claws, we're leaping in the air to jump down on them, make them prone, and keep attacking them. I'm also going to factor in basically like what happens if we Nova. We try to use all our resources because the raid boss Zealot Barbarian we're comparing up against, basically its only resource it burns is rage. And so I'm going to assume it's raging and using all of its resources, and let's see what happens when we use all of ours. So Infectious Fury, we're going to burn that as fast as we can, and I factor in the chance of them succeeding or failing and how much damage we can expect. Same with Call of the Hunt. I mentioned earlier that we're going to factor in the D6 from up to 2 allies who are also getting a damage boost from that. So looking at these numbers, we beat the Warlock baseline at all levels. There's some levels where it's not quite a 50% boost, but notice here, we didn't even need to get a feat until level 10. You're not just stuck doing custom lineage or variant human to get like level 1 polearm master so that you can get great weapon master at level 4. I love options, and having any race be viable for you is fantastic. But the halfling, especially good. So I start factoring in the super jumping for leap attacks at level 6, and then Infectious Fury at level 10. At level 12, we get the dual wielder feat. At level 16, we get the fighting style for 2-weapon fighting. And at level 14, we get the Call the Hunt damage. So let's go against the vanilla barbarian. At low levels, we are not beating it, but we gain ground at level 10 when we start doing our leaps and our Infectious Furies. Even when we weren't matching its numbers, we were still doing pretty well, especially for not having a feat at level 1. And then the raid boss Zealot. It's only by like 10-20% depending on the level. Sometimes it's more of a match, but we did start beating it at level 10. By the way, if we have disadvantage with these other barbarians we're comparing against, I assumed they are not trying to do Great Weapon Master because they're probably not even going to hit at all. So we do a lot better if there's some circumstance where we have disadvantage on attacks. Maybe we're being more defensive and we don't want a reckless attack, and we just want to do some basic damage while trying to stay up and in the fight. So I'm actually thrilled with this because on the internet, people said of the Beast Barbarian that it just cannot compare to the damage output of a Zealot. It's just, you always got to go Zealot, Beast isn't viable. This shows me that not only is it viable when you compare to the Warlock baseline, it can compete with Great Weapon Master, Polearm, Barbarians. Does it outshine them at all levels? No. Do you have to do a lot of work to do it with leaping and your abilities, and do you have to consider that this is like a Nova round? Yes, keep that in mind. I'm not going to say that you can just, in all situations, outshine it. Like I mentioned earlier, if you are doing a lot of combat encounters in an adventuring day, the Zealot Barbarian is going to outshine you, like no question. At least for damage output. But for tactics, you're going to have a lot more fun with the Beast Barbarian. Climbing up walls, jumping on people, that's the dream. To summarize some other builds, I didn't bother with DPR because I thought the biggest DPR was going to come from the claws, and that was what I really wanted to test. You can go tail and polearm and Great Weapon Master, bite and finesse weapon like rapier with a shield, but you can also use your tail, a spear, and a shield, because a spear is a piercing damage like your tail, so if you wanted to take a feat like piercer, you could, and that would work for both of them. But a spear counts with polearm master, but it's only one-handed, so you could use a shield, get 3 attacks with your spear and polearm master. You just wouldn't get the Great Weapon Master benefit of the -5 to +10 damage. And you could guard yourself with your tail. So you've got a triple threat going on. Spears are also useful for flying enemies because you can throw them if you're not jumping up to try to grab them. And don't forget, just as a general tactic for flying enemies, if they're flying by to attack you and then they go back up, you can ready an attack or ready something to grapple them on the way, so that when they're flying by, if they even have the flyby feature, this isn't an opportunity attack. You readied your action to try to grab at them and keep them earthbound. They'll probably be doing ranged attacks, but if they are doing flybys, like some avian monsters do, ready action's great. Multiclassing options. You can do the druid for its wild shape, where you become like the rabbit of Caer Banog, the killer bunny from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. You can multiclass with ranger to get your fighting style instead of having to take a feat to get it. Pair it with Swarm Keeper or Gloomstalker, and you can do some really cool stuff because those are just solid subclasses that similarly don't clog up your action economy, which is a big part of being a Beast Barbarian. So getting another subclass from the Ranger, if you want to go that far into Ranger, would be really useful for you. If you go 5th level Ranger, you get Pass Without Trace. You could even get a second Ranger feature at level 7 if you want to bypass getting Call the Hunt as a Beast Barbarian, because I know that's probably one of the least popular parts of being a Beast Barbarian, so it's okay to bypass that. What about Wizard? Wizard multi-class with Beast Barbarian. If you go War Magic Wizard, you can passively just react to give yourself a +2 to AC and a +4 to saving throws. And the downside of not being able to cast a leveled spell doesn't matter to you because you are a barbarian who is raging. Also, if you're entering a fight and you have a lot of ground to cover, you might put up a fog cloud so that enemy spellcasters can't see you, at least initially. Or maybe you drop fog cloud on an enemy spellcaster and you don't rage. And then you run in and reckless attack so that you have a normal to attack with them and they can't see you, because so many spells are based on them looking at you and being able to see you and targeting you, like a hold person or some kind of charm, which is what people always talk about shutting down barbarians. So if there's a fog cloud up and your allies aren't going to do it for you, maybe you could do it yourself and just not rage. But it's that arcane deflection from the War Magic Wizard that I would really want. Just take 2 levels of Wizard, get a bunch of fun spells and that arcane deflection, and be wise with it, and you could have some fun, even though people don't usually think Wizard Barbarian. Fighter is always great, especially if you want to get Battle Master. If you could do Action Surge, it's not going to be as great for you because your claws don't get their added attack a second time. It's just once per turn. Battle Master maneuvers could be great for you because if you're making 4 attacks per round, you could potentially use a Nova round to just use up all of your Battle Master maneuvers. A Rune Knight Fighter would allow you to grow, and so then you could pick up more enemies and say, you're coming with me, jump up in the air and drop them and do your like slamming effect to just keep wailing on them. You might as well be a gravity barbarian because you use gravity against people just as much as your weapons. If you want to just get some fortification to your saving throws, you could take a level of Divine Soul Sorcerer. Favorite of the Gods is a great way to just add 2d4 to a saving throw when you really need it in a pinch. Plus you get some first level spells from the Sorcerer, which could be really helpful. And then there's Warlock. If you wanted to go Hexblade because you just wanted to gain some quick spellcasting options, and Hexblade's Curse sounded fun to you, especially because Hexblade's Curse would do really well with your claws and dual wielding because you're making 4 attacks. Hexblade's Curse would allow you to add your proficiency bonus to each of those attacks, which could really ramp up your damage. You don't get as much value as other spellcasters might out of a dip into Hexblade, but if you like Hexblade's Curse enough, then yeah, you could do it. So which feats have I talked about? Dual Wielder, if your DM's okay with it for claws, but even if they're not, the double drawing and stowing of weapons could be useful so that you can use rapiers in addition to your claws and just juggle them. Defensive Duelist is great if you're doing bite and claw, but you could also use it if you have your claws out and you have dual wielder using a rapier, so you could guard yourself while still getting all your attacks. Polearm Master plus Great Weapon Master is always viable for a barbarian, and you get the tail option or the bite option to augment that, but tail is probably what I would go for. Fighting Initiate can be good if you don't want a multi-class but you want a fighting style. Shield Master can also be good if you're not utilizing your bonus action and you're doing one of the builds where you use a shield, maybe a spear or your tail or something like that. Shield Master can be great for setting up your allies by knocking someone prone if you don't want to jump up in the air or something. Skill Expert to gain expertise in athletics could be great, plus you get a stat boost. Fey Touch is kind of always viable because you would actually, if you're not multi-classing, gaining a Misty Step where you could potentially try to get out of a force cage at high levels or some other effect that would normally completely shut you down as a barbarian could be useful for you. Slasher or Piercer, depending on what kind of weapon you typically focus on, could turn an odd stat for your strength into a positive. So instead of taking +2 to strength, you might just take this feat to boost your strength by 1 while augmenting your attacks with slashing or piercing. And then the feat I thought about not putting on here because I've come to the conclusion that tough is usually not as good as other feats you can get, but some people made some good cases for barbarian because tough gives you 2 hit points per level, but it effectively becomes like 4 hit points because you're raging. So if you are resisting damage, which you won't always be doing, tough might be good for you, and some people just like to have a lot of hit points and not have to think about it. I'd probably say don't pick it, but I'm going to bring it up just to make that point of tough might be good for you. If that's your style and you have a lot of basic weapon attacks hurting you, maybe tough is your option. Which races do I recommend? So obviously Variant Human and Custom Lineage could be fun because you can get those feats level 1, especially if you're going the polearm build. Most people get sick of hearing that, so here are some other races you could consider. One suggestion I saw online was for the Long Tooth Shifter, which if you choose to shift, you gain a free bonus action attack for a while, so it's a good way to gain a bonus action without needing to dual wield. I don't typically love the Shifter, but it definitely does fit the Beast Barbarian's story. Shifters are basically what the Beast Barbarian is, where it's like you have some kind of bestial nature to yourself that can come out. If you want to do a lot of jump shenanigans and get some perception and initiative bonuses, the Harangon can be great. You can jump really high with a Harangon, and that doesn't take up your movement, so you can potentially do that as your bonus action with someone you're grappling to pound them on the ground, and then do it again with your regular jump and movement. So you could just be that leaping barbarian from Diablo 2 using that leap attack. I think that's a lot of fun. Just don't get encumbered by carrying someone that's too large to match your strength. Loxodons, those elephant dudes, could be really cool for you. You can grapple people with your trunk, plus your claw, your hand, plus your claw. Grapple a lot of people, plus you get the powerful build feature of Loxodon, so you count as one size larger when considering how much you can carry before you're encumbered. So you can really get into the leaping attacks with the Loxodon and be a bounding, jumping, terrifying elephant. Plus, the natural armor the Loxodon receives makes it so your dexterity doesn't need to be a 14 to use medium armor. You can invest in wisdom instead of dexterity, and this would enable you to do the druid wild shape or some other multi-classing concept where you need to invest in another stat because you don't need the dex as much. Plus, you gain a snorkel for underwater if you didn't want to do the underwater bestial soul adaptation, which could be fun, especially if you're grappling people and holding them underwater. The protector Aasimar could also be good because you get a transformation where you're adding your level to the damage of an attack once per turn, and you can fly. It requires a transformation as an action. That's the downside, is it requires an action. But word on the street is Mordenkainen's Monsters of the Multiverse book is going to change that to be a bonus action to activate, so that will make the protector Aasimar more powerful. Well, not really more powerful, but more viable to use it in the middle of a fight instead of sacrificing an action for setup. Halfling, I talked about the Halfling, getting that lucky and not being worried about being small, so you don't have to get heavy weapons as a barbarian, is a completely new experience that most people have probably not had. You won't get to do the lifting people in the air, but you can still jump up in the air and land on them. I say that because you're a small race, which means you are not able to carry and pull and push as much weight. Half-orc could be good, but again, I did the DPR and halfling is better. But I do love the flavor of half-orcs and their lore behind them where they literally feel pain when they feel intense emotions. And half-orc abilities are just built to be great barbarian augmentations. Bugbears long-limbed can give you reach on your claws and your tail and your bite, which is kind of funny to think about. Technically the way it's worded is you could stretch out your neck to bite someone far away, which feels very Orochimaru to me. The Bugbear gets other great traits as well, which I think are just being improved again in Mordenkainen's Monsters of the Multiverse, and so that'll be a great option for you. Kobolds can be fun if you want to get the Volos version with pack tactics so that you can not even need to reckless attack sometimes. Then you can choose the defensive options of the Beast Barbarian and be a raging little kobold with claws, tail, or a bite, and not worry so much about reckless attack getting pounded back, because you already have advantage from pack tactics. The Owlin or the Aarakocra are flying races that could be a lot of fun for you, and if you have a 10-foot reach with your tail or a polearm, then you don't have to worry about flying next to people. You can just fly above them and use your rage damage and attack. If you gain the bestial souls underwater swimming and breathing, you could be like one of those diving birds in the sea that dive into the water to get their prey and then come back up, so you're flying and underwater and you go between the two effortlessly. Another flying race that could be fun is the fairy, which has some fun options, but I just like the idea of becoming a ferocious little fairy with your claws out, slicing and dicing everyone. The Dampier could also be fun because you gain that bite option where you could pick your tail to use defensively, and then you also have your Dampier bite, and you could use it pretty reliably to guard yourself with a shield and also have another item or be able to grapple someone with your other hand, so you get 4 options: bite, tail, shield, grapple. Plus you have built-in spider climbing as a Dampier, so then you could freely pick your jump option or your underwater option. Simic Hybrid from Ravnica would also be fun because you could get some of those permanent buffs for underwater or for climbing. Tentacles, armor like carapace, acid spit. This all feels very much like a Beast Barbarian, especially the concept I brought up earlier of being an escaped experiment. Whatever the Beast Barbarian wants to do, the Simic Hybrid can just add to it, so you kind of always have some of those options that normally you'd have to choose between. You have one of them always going. You could also use the grappling appendages one to have some tentacles or something, so you go ham with your claws to do 3 attacks, and then you use your bonus action to do a grapple, and you could do that pretty reliably all the time. Also, if your DM allows you to at some point be cursed with lycanthropy, think of what that would do to your character. So if you become a werewolf, Beast Barbarian, plus whatever race you are, that could be really cool, and you'd maybe your DM could do a custom werewolf stat block for you because of your bestial soul. If you had a lycanthrope ancestor, maybe it brings out some sort of mutation in you. You're a greater werewolf. I recommend going to my article if you want to read it, but I will put up on the screen all the different rules you need to know to help you use jumping effectively as an offensive tool. There's quite a few of them actually. So I'll put them up on the screen, but go to my article if you want to look over them and see what numbered page they are in the rule books that they are in. So what would I change about the Beast Barbarian? 4 things. I would allow Bestial Soul, your adaptation at level 6 where you just get a passive bonus. I would allow you to change which one you chose when you enter a rage. So if you thought you were going to be underwater but you're in a cave where you need to spider climb, when you enter your rage, you could change your adaptation from the underwater breathing and swimming to the spider climb. I think that would be a good improvement to just make you more flexible. I would allow Call of the Hunt to also add its d6 of damage to yourself and not just your allies. So right now you only get temporary hit points and your allies get a d6. I would allow you to just get an extra d6 once per turn as well. That's not a big deal. That just seems like a good change. Infectious Fury's psychic damage, I would make it part of your attack just like a smite or a sneak attack is. So if you crit, you do 4d12 psychic damage instead of 2d12. And then it would also make your brutal criticals better. So then your crit with your Infectious Fury would be 4d12 plus another 3d12. So that's 7d12 from the Infectious Fury alone. Plus you add like the other effects of your attack if you were attacking with a claw or something. That just feels really good to me. Especially because Infectious Fury is based on them failing a con save. Make the reward a little bit greater. That's what I would change. And then lastly, I would just make some verbiage in the clause for Form of the Beast to say you can use these for 2-weapon fighting. They count as light. That just seems like a good quality of life change. Dual wielding is already super weak. 2-weapon fighting is weak in 5th edition. Just give them the option. I would just make that inherent into the wording of the clause. I love the Beast Barbarian, and its damage is more viable than I thought when I really start digging into DPR. It really isn't completely overshadowed by the Zealot as long as you consider Nova rounds. If you are smart, the options you pick up and the defensive options you have are worth it to me to not be a Zealot Barbarian, which used to be my favorite, I'd say. I like options, and the Beast Barbarian has those without sacrificing too much damage that a Barbarian wants to be doing. Debatably, it's still one of the most viable barbarians for dealing damage. Does it have the same sustainability as some of them that can stay up longer if they die? They don't die while they're raging like the Zealot, or they resist all damage but psychic like the Totem. I don't think it has that kind of sustain, but debatably, the more you can up your armor class and use reactions to up your armor class, or you have that bite feature to heal yourself potentially, could be just as good as some of those other features. So did I change your mind at all about the Beast Barbarian if you thought it was not worth your time? I hope I made you at least think it might be. Did I get anyone excited? Like, let me know, what did this video do for you and the Beast Barbarian? I hope it was transformative and informative. If you liked this content and you want to see me do more of these deep dives, because it takes me a lot of time to like really make sure I've got them dialed in, subscribe, like, and comment, and tell me, Flutes, Jordan, do way more of these because we love it. Like, that would be really motivating for me to put in the time. And I hope I earned your engagement and your subscription so that I can keep doing this for you if this is valuable content. My wife Opal also participates in this channel if this is your first time here, and she has videos. She does a lot more lore-based stuff where I'm kind of more number crunchy and trying to like think about what it means to play the mechanics of the game. I'll see you in the next video, and until then, have a good adventure this weekend or weekday, whenever people are playing these days. I'll see you in the next video.